Allied Shippers Association, your ally in international shipping. Allied Shippers Association presents the International Supply Chain, a brief tour. In our brief presentation today, we'll talk about the steps in the process for the international supply chain. We'll talk about the booking of international cargo. We'll talk about the sailing and transit time for international cargo. We'll talk about freight release. We'll talk about the cargo's arrival in the U.S. and its customs clearance. And finally, we'll talk about the delivery of cargo from the arrival location to your destination in the U.S. The booking of a shipment refers to the process of making arrangements to transport that shipment from its country of origin to its destination in the USA. There are many parties involved in this process, including the importer, their supplier, the freight forwarder or freight booking agent, the ocean carrier, the U.S. customs broker, the delivering trucker, and many more. In the booking process, communication is critical, and that communication should be between the importer and their supplier, and also between the importer, the supplier, and the freight agent or freight forwarder who is booking the cargo. Timing is everything. Importers must clearly state their dates and deadlines so that the cargo can move in a timely fashion. Ocean freight is not an overnight process. In fact, many ocean shipments coming to the USA can take from 30 days or even longer from the port of origin to the delivery point in the USA. It's critical to have your shipments booked early to make sure that your shipment has space on the vessel that is sailing the earliest. Working with your supplier and freight agent, you can make sure these early bookings happen. It's also critical that importers have a reference number for every shipment they book. Miscommunication or shipping of the wrong cargo can be a real costly mistake. So importers should come up with a system of a reference number, either a purchase order number or another number that will allow them to identify a shipment. And then we have the approval process. This can work many different ways. Oftentimes the foreign supplier will contact the freight agent and notify them of their intent to have a container loaded and give them the date for that loading. The U.S. importer may wish to approve every shipment on a case-by-case basis before it's loaded in the container. It's important, again, communicate with your freight agent or freight forwarder, the company that's helping you in that process, so that they're aware of what steps they must take to get your approval before a shipment is actually booked and loaded for shipment. Let's talk a little bit about the sailing and transit time for international cargo. You'll see references to things like ETD, which is the estimated time of departure, and you'll also see ATD, which is the actual time of departure. The ETD is the date that the supplier and overseas forwarder have indicated that the vessel is due to sail from its foreign port. The actual sailing date takes into account any delays that might have occurred. There are often cutoff dates for the return of the loaded container and the documents required for export. It's important that the supplier, the freight agent, and the importer coordinate closely to make sure that cutoff dates are met so that cargo is not delayed. It's also important that the automated manifest system or AMS filing is done in a timely fashion. And also for ocean shipments to the United States, importers must be certain that their freight agent or customs broker is filing the ISF or importer security filing in a timely fashion. The failure to file these documents electronically in a timely fashion can result in significant penalties being assessed against the importer. You may also have heard of abbreviations like MLB, which is mini land bridge shipping, or AW, or all water shipping. Some containers arrive in the U.S. at a port of arrival and then move via either train or truck to another inland port. Other shipments come directly from a foreign port to a U.S. port that receives the ocean freight container. There are differences between the MLB and the all-water moves, and it's important to understand the difference in cost and transit times, and those all vary based on the final destination for the imported cargo. Here's something you don't want to hear. My container got rolled. Well, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean the container was flipped over? No. Getting rolled basically means that the container was scheduled to depart on a ship, and that ship was full. Therefore, the container was rolled or delayed until the next vessel sailing. This can happen for a number of reasons, but it's important to note that when you have a low cost for your ocean transport, that cargo may be lower priority with the steamship line and may be rolled first. Let's talk about low cost versus fast transit. Those two don't necessarily work together. The lowest cost may be the slowest transit time. It's important that you compare cost and transit time whenever shipping. Import shipments move to the United States under a bill of lading. The bill of lading is a legal document that conveys the ownership of the cargo. It's important to note most suppliers will demand payment before they release the cargo for delivery to your company. You need to work with your supplier closely to understand their payment terms and make certain you're meeting those terms so that your cargo isn't delayed. There are several ways a bill of lading can be issued. One is what's called an original bill of lading. This is a document that is a bearer document. In other words, whoever holds that original bill of lading has ownership of the cargo at that moment. And there are also what are called telex released or express released bills of lading, sometimes still called a seaway bill. And under these types of bill of lading, the cargo is already released. Once it arrives in the U.S., no further freight release is required. Speak with your freight forwarder to get more specifics on original bills of lading versus telex or express release. I highly recommend that whenever possible, you have your supplier issue a telex or express release so that there's no delay and you don't have to worry about original documents being lost in the mail. So how is freight released? Freight is released once the bill of lading is surrendered or released with a telex release, and at that point, the ocean carrier may release that cargo to the party in the U.S. named on those documents. It can take time for a freight release to be processed, often 24 to 48 hours, and in some cases even longer. It's important that you work with your supplier and your freight agent to make sure that the bill of lading release, the freight release, is processed as early as possible so your cargo is not delayed. Some companies still issue original documents, and these original documents often have to be sent to the U.S. by a courier. This can be a costly process. Documents could be lost in the transport. It should be avoided wherever possible. In many cases, copies that are sent via email attachment will suffice for U.S. customs clearance and release of cargo. Again, talk to your freight agent, your customs broker, and your supplier, and make sure you're all on the same page, whether you'll need original documents for your shipment or whether you can get by with copies sent via email attachment. Well, the ship has now transited the ocean and has arrived at the first U.S. port of arrival. Let's talk through that process. Early on, you were likely given an ETA for your shipment. An ETA is usually, or estimated time of arrival, usually refers to the date that the ocean container ship, is due to arrive at the U.S. port, and the ATA, or actual time of arrival, is the date and time that the cargo ship actually arrives. Now let's talk about that a little bit. When a ship arrives in port, it's officially arrived. So the ETA turns into an ATA, and that ship has now arrived. But your container is sitting on that ship with 4,000 or 8,000 or maybe 10,000 or more other containers all neatly stacked. And that ship might be within the port limits, but it hasn't gotten clearance to pull up to a dock yet. It's kind of like when you are on an aircraft and you arrive at an airport, the plane lands, you're officially on the ground, you're officially at that airport, but you're still sitting in the aircraft waiting to get to a gate where you can disembark from the aircraft. Kind of the same way with cargo. So the ship arrives, it may be a day or more before that ship is actually allowed to pull up to a docking location at the pier where the containers can be unloaded. That unloading process can take anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, in some cases even longer. The larger vessels we're now seeing, some of these vessels carrying 14,000 and 15,000 containers or more, can take a day and a half or more just to unload that one vessel. And while that vessel's unloading, other vessels may be waiting for that space. So as you can see, as ships get bigger, the unloading time gets longer, and the chance of a delay in the port gets greater. So what are some of the sticking points or the common delays that your container might face once it arrives in the U.S.? We've touched on a couple of these already. Your ship has to wait to get a dock location, has to wait for the longshoreman to unload the containers from the vessel. But what are some other sticking points you might run across? Well, in some ports, there's actually a shortage of chassis. Now, the chassis is the wheeled body that the container is set on so that the container can be pulled by a truck from that pier to its final destination. There's a chassis shortage in many ports, or an imbalance where chassis are going out faster than they're being returned. And what can happen in those cases, the container may wait a day or more to get a chassis so that it can be mounted on that chassis and then taken to its final destination. Some of the other common problems we see are a trucker shortage. This is a huge problem in the U.S. that's likely to get worse before it ever gets better. There's a shortage of drivers. There are a shortage of companies that want to deal with some of the headaches that go along with operating an international freight terminal in the ports. So finding a trucker that has availability to move your cargo can be a bit of a challenge too. Your freight agent can do a lot of things to help smooth that process, though no one can completely eliminate that risk. So let's say your container arrives in the port of Los Angeles, but your company is located near the port of Memphis. Well, the ship can't get to Memphis until there's a canal built, which I don't foresee. So for now, those containers have to be unloaded from the ship in the port of Los Angeles, and then they have to be loaded on a train that makes the journey from Los Angeles to the Memphis rail yard within the port of Memphis. Now that process, the actual movement on the rail, can take anywhere from 4 to 5 days, depending on where you're located, in some cases a little longer. In our example of Memphis, a normal transit time from the port in LA to the railhead in Memphis is about 5 days. The train will stop at other locations along the way. Sometimes the cars get moved to other trains, so there are some delays along the way. One of the common delays we see is that the rail system is not able to handle the huge volume of ocean containers. So you have a big ship coming to the port, it's got 14,000 containers, and a lot of them are moving inland. There may not be enough trains for 4, 5, 6, 7 days to move all those containers to their final destination. So your container might sit at the rail yard in Los Angeles, in this example, waiting to get to Memphis. Even though the transit time is normally 5 days, it may add 3 to 5 more days depending on how long it's delayed getting on a train. So the train arrives in the port of Memphis, then it can take another 24 to 48 hours for the train cars to be unloaded, for those containers to come off the train, and for those containers to be mounted on a chassis so that the truck can pick them up. Again, there are chassis shortages at many ports, including rail ports. So in some cases, your container may wait a little while waiting on a chassis so your trucker can deliver it. And finally, it's arrived. Is it all clear? Now, we'll talk a little bit more about customs clearance in a moment, but there are other federal agencies that look at imported cargo. One of the most common ones is the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. The USDA is responsible for finding pests that might have stowed away on board containers. So the USDA will look at a lot of containers trying to see if there's any pests on board. The number of USDA examinations or delays or holds really depends on the type of cargo you're importing and where you're importing from. All right, so let's move on now to customs clearance. Speaking about customs clearance, let's talk about some of the more common terms you may have heard and explain this just a bit. One thing you may hear about is pre-clearance. Basically, your customs broker can file the information with U.S. Customs electronically before your shipment arrives in the U.S., normally 3, 4, or 5 days before arrival, and U.S. Customs can review that information electronically and then make a decision whether they want to release that cargo even before it arrives. This does happen in probably 90% of the cases, but the other 10%, Customs may want to review documents physically where the broker has to upload those documents electronically to Customs, or Customs may want to open the container and physically look inside or run it through an X-ray. So in those cases, they wouldn't be allowed to be pre-cleared. It would have to wait until the container arrived. Let me say this, it's critical that your broker at least attempt to pre-clear your shipments. Why? Because the earlier you get information into Customs' hands, the easier it is for Customs to screen that information and hopefully pre-clear your freight before it arrives. Customs clearance is about documentation and communication. Today, most of what we do with Customs is done electronically. While the broker receives paper documents in many cases from the supplier and from the importer, the broker converts the information on those paper documents into an electronic format and transmits that to U.S. Customs. U.S. Customs reviews that electronic data, and then they might ask for a physical hard copy of a document, but in many cases they just make their determination based on the electronic information they receive. So what are the potentials for delay here? As I spoke about, a good number of containers are pulled aside for customs examinations, or Customs may look at particular products due to an enforcement effort or some type of problem with those type of products, and they might demand samples, they might demand paperwork to review and to validate. So there are reasons for delay, and importers need to understand, though we live in a day that things move pretty quickly, when it comes to customs clearance, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, one of their roles is to protect our country against illicit products, dangerous products, illegal products. So there are going to be cases where your shipments are delayed, but they're really only doing their job, trying to make it safer for all of us. Keeping that supply chain safe is important. Remember this, U.S. Customs is a law enforcement agency. Their job, their goal is not to make sure your cargo gets cleared and delivered as quickly as possible. Their goal is to make certain that all laws, rules, and regulations are fully enforced. So, knowing that, how can you help speed the customs clearance process? I'll touch on this really briefly, and if you're interested in more information, you can get my contact information at the end of the presentation and reach out to me directly. CTPAT is a voluntary program where importers can become certified as helping to keep the supply chain secure. This is a program that U.S. Customs administers. Importers have to apply for membership in the program and for certification. But once you're certified, you're basically on the good guy list. You see fewer exams, fewer delays, and the costs that go along with those exams and delays get reduced greatly. CTPAT's a really good option if you import on a regular basis. Okay, so we've made our way through a lot of the international shipping process. Let's get down to the very end. And this is where things can either go really well or really bad. And it's important that you have a freight agent and a customs broker that you really trust and that is looking out for your best interest. So the shipment arrives, it's customs cleared, but is it available? Did it get off the ship? Did it get off the train? Is it mounted on a chassis so that the trucker can pick it up? It's important that we know all those things before we send a trucker to try to get the container. We have to know what the last free day is. And each port, each facility has its own number of free days that they allow your container to sit in their facility before they start charging demurrage, which is a storage fee. It's important you know how many free days you get in each port, and it can vary. Different facilities in the same port may have a different number of free days. Different carriers may offer a different number of free days. Work with your freight forwarder or freight agent so you fully understand that important option, the number of free days. Chassis rental. So we talked about the chassis. The chassis is the wheels that go underneath the container that allows the trucker to bring that container to you. Well, chassis belong to rental companies, so truckers have to rent those chassis, and there's a charge involved, and that charge is steadily increasing. The average today is somewhere between $30 and $35 a day for chassis rental. We're seeing that start to push upward maybe to $40 and $45 in some cases. It's part of the process, and you will be charged for chassis rental, normally at least 2 days, to allow the trucker time to bring the shipment to you and return the empty container and the chassis to the terminal. It can be more. It can be 3 and 4 days. But if you work with your trucker and you coordinate the rapid receiving of that cargo, you can help reduce the amount of chassis rental you have to pay. I mentioned demurrage. Demurrage is a charge that is assessed by the terminal or by the carrier when containers stay in their facility longer than the last free day. It's important that you coordinate closely with your broker or forwarder because demurrage charges can be sizable. $200 a day up to $300, $400, $500 a day per container can be assessed. So this is one where you've got to have really close coordination. Work with a good broker, work with a good forwarder. They can help you out. And what is per diem? Per diem is a charge where a container and a chassis are removed from the terminal and then kept outside the terminal beyond the free time that the trucker is allowed to return that empty container. In those cases, per diem is charged, and that can be relatively small amounts, like $25 a day, but I've seen it exceed $100 a day in some cases. So again, work with your freight agent, work with your customs broker and your trucker. Be clear on that and do what you can to help them make sure that there's no demurrage and per diem. You got to know about free time on the delivery side as well. When the driver shows up at your door with that container, the clock starts. Some trucking companies give an hour, some give 2 of what they call free time. So the driver will wait an hour or in some cases 2 hours while you unload the container. And then anytime he or she stays beyond that free time, you get charged an hourly rate. And that can be anywhere from $65 to $125 an hour, depending on the trucking company, depending on where you're located. So it's important when that container arrives, you work quickly to unload the container. Finally, let's talk about live unloading of a container versus what's called drop and pick. To live unload a container means the trucker backs it up to your dock door, your staff immediately goes to work, unloads that container within that driver's free time window, it sends that driver on his way, and everybody's happy. In some cases, customers want to do what's called drop and pick. This is where the driver brings the container mounted on that chassis, brings it to your facility, disconnects himself, and leaves the container behind. Now, this works for some companies. It's important due to the timing of unloading the container. Perhaps they don't have enough warehouse space, but drop and pick service can be costly. Drop and pick service can subject you to per diem charges and extra chassis rental charges. So it's really important whenever possible to do a live unload. Again, talk to your freight agent, your customs broker. They can kind of guide you through this process and help you make sure you're doing what works best for your company and also keeps your costs as low as possible. All right, let's do a recap. We talked about communication being a key. Talk to your supplier, talk to your broker, your freight agent, your freight forwarder. Communicate, communicate, communicate. I always recommend communicate in writing. Put it in an email so that everybody's clear and on the same page. Your freight agent, your supplier, your broker, your forwarder, they should understand your policies and procedures regarding your imported containers so that everyone understands the goals and the deadlines and the timelines, and everyone can do their part to make sure those are all met. You have to understand the process, and you have to have procedures that are in place that meet your company's needs. Again, talk to your partners in this process so they know what your company's needs are so that they can make sure those needs are met. Work closely with your service providers. You should work with service providers that are knowledgeable, that understand the process clearly, that are good communicators, and that are there to help you. You should know each party's role in the supply chain, and those roles can vary. As I've said, you've got a foreign supplier involved, you've got a freight forwarder or a freight agent involved, you've got an ocean carrier involved, you've got a customs broker and a trucker involved. Maybe you have a warehouse where your cargo goes, you have a warehouse operator involved. You have to know each party. You have to understand what their roles and responsibilities are so that you don't get any ugly surprises. Let me close by saying this. Ultimately, as an importer, you are responsible for the import shipment. That includes all costs, that includes penalties, that includes delays, problems, you name it. You're responsible. So make sure you take the time to understand who does what your roles and responsibilities are, and then communicate. All right, so we've gotten through our presentation. I appreciate your time. Let me tell you just a little bit about us, a little sales pitch here at the end. Allied Shippers Association exists to help our members be able to import ocean containers into the U.S. at competitive rates while providing excellent service. Allied Shippers Association negotiates with carriers to get the best possible rates. We negotiate with the truckers. We make sure we use partners that provide excellent service. Through our sister companies, we offer customs clearance services and consulting services. We can help with your customs bond or your cargo insurance. Allied Shippers Association exists to make the lives of their members easier. Our goal is to make international shipping for you as streamlined and cost-effective as possible. We tailor-make our solutions to fit your individual needs. Every company's different. We don't force you into a mold. We find out what your needs are, what you would like your supply chain to look like, and we help you find a way to shape it the way it fits your company best. Again, we offer a full range of supply chain services, so whatever your need in international shipping, Allied Shippers Association is here to help. My name is Steve Fodor. I'm the Executive Director and the founder of Allied Shippers Association. I've been in the industry for about 35 years. I'm a licensed customs house broker, and my goal every day is pretty much the same, to help my customers succeed. Because I believe when my customers succeed, we'll succeed. So contact me. You can reach out to me through our general email, asa@asa-us.com, or you can contact me at my personal email, Steve, steve.fodor, Fodor, @asa-us.com, or you can give me a call at our toll-free number, 844-705-4378. I'm here to help, and I think Allied Shippers can help you make your supply chain move smoothly. We're your ally in shipping, and we're here to help. Thanks again, and we appreciate your time.